You're listening to the Huddle Up Podcast with Chad Jensen and Zack Kelberman. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com and sound off. And now it's time to drop some knowledge.
Welcome in, everybody, to the Huddle Up Podcast, presented, as always, by Mile High Huddle and powered by Overtime Media. I'm your host, Chad Jensen, and with me, as always, is my partner in crime. You know him, you love him, as the lead NFL writer for Heavy.com. He is Zack Kelberman. Zack, it was a tumultuous Monday. I mean, Mondays are usually pretty busy in terms of Broncos news, no matter where we're at in the season schedule or whatever, but this particular Monday, I got to admit, I didn't quite see it coming, the cuts that happened. And, of course, we're going to break it down here in just a few minutes. But an eventful morning.
It was, and I didn't see this coming either, Chad. I thought they would try to get through this next week in the last preseason game, and then the cuts would start coming after that. But they want to give these players a chance to latch on with other teams a week early, and I commend them for that. That's a nice gesture on their part. They didn't have to do that. And they're starting to pare down the roster now. They're going to have a lot more tough decisions ahead of them, though. I mean, this is a thing where there's so many injuries and so many different things up in the air that they're just trimming the fattest of the fat right now. They still have to get down to the bare bones of it, so it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, so if you take the 37 players that are going to be cut by the Denver Broncos, counting the 3 that were released on Monday, total they're going to cut 37, times that by 32 teams. You have 1,100 players. Is that right? 37 times 32. You have almost 1,200 players that are going to be hitting the waiver wire next Saturday. So the Denver Broncos are definitely, I think, by releasing who they released on Monday, we'll get to that here in just a minute, as you said, trying to do those guys a solid, because it's a lot easier to get noticed and perhaps latch on when you're one of maybe a dozen cuts across the league than one of 12 freaking hundred, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, they're kind of singled out in this news wire. There wasn't a whole lot that went on today after the Luck bomb, and they hopefully they get an opportunity. There's some veteran experience in there. There's some good players in there, and the Broncos did a thing they didn't have to do, and hopefully they're working up their good karma because it kind of hit them in a bad way this summer.
Well, we're going to get to those cuts here in just a second. We're going to talk also about some really interesting comments that came Vic Fangio's way by 3 of the hottest young offensive coaches in the NFL. We're going to get to all that here in just a second. But first, a quick reminder, make sure you are following the show on Twitter, especially if you're new to the show. The reason why, that's how you keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening with the Huddle Up Podcast in real time, at Huddle Up Pod. Also, a reminder to all of you listening, go to iTunes right now. If you have not left us a creative review and a 5-star rating yet, you can get in on the giveaway that we're doing this month and leave a review. Tell us how we're doing. We want your feedback. Give us a 5-star rating if you're liking what you're hearing. And then on September 1st, we are going to randomly draw a name from one of our awesome listeners who left a review in the month of August and give away some swag. So go get that done. And by the way, Zach and I have talked about it. This is something we're going to do month in, month out. We're starting it here in August, so go take care of that. And all of you on YouTube, we love you. Keep doing what you're doing. Don't forget to subscribe. So many of you are listening. About 30% of you are listening but not subscribing. Not sure I understand that, but go ahead and take care of that. Hit subscribe and click the notification bell, the whole 9 yards. Fantasy football fans, you got to listen up. Do you want to join the biggest NFL season-long tournament ever? Of course you do. If you love fantasy football, and we know you do, then you need to enter the $3.5 million Best Ball Championship on Draft. That's right, $3.5 million in real money. It is absolutely enormous. It's huge. It's season long, but there's no management. You just set it, you forget it. So instead of agonizing over your lineup every single Sunday, Draft does the analysis for you, gives you the most efficient, best odds to win your matchup lineup week in and week out. You do a draft, 16 weeks later, you could be a millionaire. Literally. It does not get any easier than that. It's the highest rated fantasy app, and it's available on the App Store and Google Play, or you can just go online to draft.com. For a limited time only, you can get a free entry into the Best Ball Championship when you make your first deposit. But you have to use our promo code HUDDLE. That's right. A free shot at $1 million just by using our promo code HUDDLE when you make your first deposit on Draft. Also, a phenomenal way to support the Huddle Up podcast. Just search Draft in the App Store or go to draft.com and come play free with promo code HUDDLE.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, Zach, let's get to the bloodbath, if you will, from Monday morning. First and foremost, what happened was the Denver Broncos announced that they had released Zach Kerr, defensive lineman, and then also the draft day trade Dakota Watson, outside linebacker, 2 veterans. And then later on in the day, Nick Williams, the wide receiver who was signed, I think it was July 26th. The 6-year veteran was released. So 3 surprise cuts, none of which were like, future / undrafted rookie caliber guys. These were all veterans. So again, going back to what we were talking about, I think that was one of the reasons. Once the Broncos had decided that these guys weren't making their roster for one reason or another, they're doing them what small amount of a solid they can in the face of, firing them by doing it now. So first and foremost, though, let's talk about Zach Kerr, because this is the one actually that surprised me the most. Because, of course, Zach Kerr originally arrived in Denver in 2017 on the heels of the Vance Joseph hire, 2-year deal, and he played it out as a depth rotational player, was never really maximized the way I think he could have been under the Vance Joseph, Joe Woods regime. So the Broncos, though, they let him hit free agency this past spring, tested the waters, came back with what he was getting in terms of offers and whatnot from around the league, re-signed him to a relatively modest 2-year deal. I don't know, $600K was guaranteed, or maybe that was just the signing bonus. I think that was the full guarantee at signing. And so it cost him $600,000 to keep him around for 6 months, basically, Zach. But that one surprised me because he was one of the 5 D linemen that I viewed as basically a shoo-in by virtue of the fact that the Broncos just re-signed him and paid him, basically. To see him cut, I think the implication, we'll talk about what Fangio said here in just a minute, but the implication has to be that that guys like Mike Purcell, who's the only other big beef space eater guy in the middle of that defense, and Deshawn Williams have played so well that they like what they saw from them and the upside potential there over the relatively known quantity that is Zach Kerr.
Yeah, Chad, I mentioned this in the last podcast, in the reaction podcast to the last game. Purcell really jumped out on tape. He penetrated really well in the backfield and exploded to the ball carrier. And I just think he has a higher ceiling on a down-and-down basis than Zach Kerr, who is a good run stuffer, but that's pretty much it. He offers no pass rushing prowess. I'm not saying Mike Purcell's the next, Lawrence Taylor. I just think he fits better in the system, and he's taken to Fangio's system better than Kerr, who was more of a Vance Joseph player. I'm not totally surprised by this move, and I think it adds a little versatility to the whole Broncos defensive line. And when you look at the whole group, they have a veteran in Derek Wolfe and Adam Gotsis. They have key versatile players in Draymond Jones and Marcus Walker. And they have a guy in Mike Purcell now, and potentially Deshawn Williams if they keep him, and 2 big run stuffers who can also get to the quarterback and provide some more interior pressure. I like it. I actually agree with the move. And both of these moves were made, and they had to be made because they were so pressed up against the salary cap, Chad. They cleared about $3 million, I believe it was, and they had 2.6 in remaining cap space before these moves were made. They had to make them, and I agree with Kerr at least.
See, that I'm not sure yet that I agree. Today I'm kind of torn because I think Zach Kerr, he showed it during his young career in Indianapolis that he had some intriguing upside. And again, I think that he was never really utilized to his utmost in the 2 years the 2 full seasons he was in Denver under Vance Joseph. And I'm just not convinced yet that the duo or either of Mike Purcell or Deshawn Williams, we'll see if both those guys end up making the 53, but are going to be a better option. However, the silver lining, and I can't disagree here, is that it does free up cap space because the Broncos have just been ridiculously cap-strapped, especially coming out of the draft and all their free agent signings. I mean, they were cutting it close to the quick. Now, Dakota Watson, another surprising one, because what did the Broncos give up in that draft day trade? Wasn't it a 5th-round pick?
Yeah, and I think the Niners gave back a 6th, which they used for Winfrey.
Right. So why did you waste that pick? That's right. I don't understand that. Like, I don't know.
To me, it's the emergence of Malik Reed and Justin Hollins, who, again, two players who flashed in last week's game. I also don't like the fact, Chad, I agree with you, that they gave up compensation for a guy and 4 months later, almost to the day, cut him and gave that pick up for nothing. But on the plus side, when you have two young players starting to develop ahead of schedule and you're cutting a veteran for those players, it's kind of a good problem to have. I'm not happy that they don't have much veteran experience in their backup core now. I mean, he was at least a veteran presence in the locker room. He played two positions, and I like Malik Reed, I like Justin Hollins, but they are young players. Bradley Chubb is a young player. You're pretty much left with just Von Miller in that outside linebacking core to coach the other backers. So, yeah, the compensation kind of it bugs me, it bites, but I like the fact that you have younger players developing and they're more explosive and have higher ceilings than what Watson brought to the table again.
Yeah. Yep, and that's fair. I mean, Malik Reed has been a revelation, but we knew that Justin Hollins, barring just completely tanking it as a rookie, was going to make this roster as a fifth-round pick. And I think what really tanked Watson more than anything was just the roster math, the way this thing is going to have to shake out for the Denver Broncos, just from a numbers perspective, because by carrying Von Miller, Bradley Chubb, Malik Reed, and Justin Hollins as your four edges, it also gives you an additional firepower piece for your off-ball linebacker depth in Hollins, because we don't know exactly how those numbers are going to shake out with Todd Davis behind schedule on his recovery from that calf injury. His availability for week 1 is in doubt officially. It really is. We don't know if he's going to be ready to go for that Raiders game. So you got him. Josie Jewell's been banged up, but I think he's going to be fine. Joe Jones is in the weeds right now. We don't know what's going to happen quite yet with him. Then you got Alexander Johnson, Jamaal Carter, Josh Watson, and Keyshawn Bierria, right? And those numbers there, I mean, last year the Broncos carried a whopping 6 off-ball guys, just straight off-ball guys on the active roster coming out of camp. I think it's safe to say they're not going to do that again, and one of the reasons why is they're basically carrying 3 true edge defenders plus a utility guy in Hollins that's going to do time on both sides.
It's great point, Chad. And it's the same reason why I like Jamaal Carter and what he brings at inside linebacker now. I'm not saying he's locked into a spot, far from it, but he can also play safety too. So if you keep him on the roster, you're getting a guy who plays 2 positions and is also a good special teamer. And, not to segue into a different conversation, but they can't have enough good special teamers on this team. But yeah, you're right. If they keep those 4, at least you get an additional guy moonlighting at inside linebacker and outside linebacker. I don't want to put too much on his plate, though. That's my only thing. It's still overloading him. He looked good in one preseason game, but I'm not ready to also say he's some starting caliber player just yet. He's made some bad mistakes this preseason too, and I don't want to DeMarcus Walker him with playing 2 positions. I hope he blossoms well, but it's just as unfortunate, like you said, Chad, the roster's math and the injuries and all the things that happened, it makes these decisions that much more difficult, and you have to cut veteran players at positions that you don't really have the luxury to do so. Yeah.
We're going to talk about Nick Williams here in just a minute. We'll go a little bit deeper into that. But first, while we're still on the topic of these defensive guys, I want to bring to our listeners' attention what Vic Fangio had to say about the moves on Monday. And basically he was asked whether he has anybody in particular in mind to fill either of those 2 spots that they released, the defensive line spot and the edge defender spot. Quote, "On the D-line, I think Deshawn Williams and Mike Purcell have done well for themselves, so we'll see how it goes." Close quote. Well, that leaves what about DeMarcus Walker, which was the follow-up question. He said, quote, "Yeah, he's done well for himself also." Close quote. And then one more. They dug a little bit deeper on Purcell, wondering whether or not he's a versatile guy. Can he play multiple positions on the D-line? Fangio, quote, "He can play anywhere along the line because he can do it mentally. He's strong enough. He's not ideally suited to be an end, but he can do it in a pinch." So, close quote. So what that means, I think, Zach, is they're projecting ahead the defensive line to be thus: Derek Wolfe, Shelby Harris, Adam Gotsis. There's your starting trio. Draymond Jones is one of the backup ends. Mike Purcell's the backup nose tackle. Who's going to be that other backup end? Is it going to be DeMarcus Walker? Is it going to be Deshawn Williams? I don't think the Denver Broncos are going to carry both Williams and Walker. I think backed into a corner, they're going to give Walker one last swing, one last opportunity, and Williams is probably going to be a last. One more casualty here in Denver yet again. I think this will be the 3rd year in a row. Maybe I'm wrong. It's at least 2 in a row that he didn't quite make it out of camp. onto the active roster. But I guess there's still a chance too, Zach, they might carry all three. I just think if they do that, it's a position of strength. You're going to go over on a position of strength. Okay, fine. But now you're going to go light at another position. So I think you got to pick two from those three guys, Walker, Purcell, Williams. Right now my money's on Purcell and Walker.
I'm right there with you, and Williams isn't a good enough player, Chad, where you have to keep him. He's pretty ordinary, and there's a reason why he was left off the 53 under Vance Joseph, who knew him from Cincinnati. I just don't think he's worth keeping on the roster over someone like Mike Purcell, and especially the other players they have. But in terms of defensive end, they have so much versatility now. I mean, you can play Walker there. You can try Draymond Jones there. You can even try Bradley Chubb with his hand in the dirt. You never know what Vic Fangio is going to do to maybe compensate for the lack of depth at defensive end. I just know with all the players they have, they can certainly manufacture some pressure. They can certainly make it work. They're just so versatile along the line with so many players that they have already.
The thing with Nick Williams, let's kind of transition there, is that he was brought in and placed on a depth chart in which the Broncos are really strong at wide receiver. So his only hope, and I'm sure this was conveyed to him when he signed with the Broncos, was to distinguish himself as a punt returner. And I wouldn't say he was bad at all. I can't, at least off the top of my head, think of him muffing a punt or anything like that, unless I miss my mark. If so, remind me of it. But he just wasn't able to separate. No one has at that position. That's one of the big unanswered questions for this team right now, special teams in general, but especially the punt returner. We have no clarity there. And unfortunately for Nick Williams, he just, if he was going to make it, he was going to make it as the sixth guy, and he was going to do so because he brought, dual utility. He could play specials as a returner. He could run down kicks. He just wasn't able to distinguish himself, and that really is what it boils down to.
I mean, it's unfortunate, but he was just a pretty ordinary player, and he didn't stand out. If he would have brought one of those punt returns back to the house, Chad, he would have been, I wouldn't say locked into a spot, but he had a pretty good chance. But he didn't really do anything that spectacular, and he was never going to make the final roster, and he was right in going to the Broncos and saying, listen, you're not going to keep me. I'd like to latch on elsewhere. I think I have a shot, and I hope he does well. To me, what stood out to me about him after watching Isaiah McKenzie and Brendan Langley, he had at least sure hands. He didn't do much with the ball, but that can't be undervalued. And in terms of the punt return competition, what I'm starting to think is that no one is standing out. They've tried so many different players. You have to look at the common denominator here. And I don't want to point fingers at Tom McMahon, but maybe we're starting to blame the wrong people here. And maybe Williams was a scapegoat for that. But they have to get that fixed. They have to find a guy. He wasn't going to make it a receiver, wasn't going to make it a punt returner, no spot for him. And both did the right thing in their respective moves.
I'm working on an article, and so I'm going to tease it a little bit here. I'm not going to give the whole thing away. But I see three positions currently, three spots on the 53-man roster that the Broncos are going to probably have to go outside the team, off roster, to fill, to resolve. And that punt returner, I think, is going to be one of them. I think of that nearly 1,200 players who are going to be hitting the wire on Saturday, I think the Broncos are going to be combing through for the next best option to come in and provide any kind of modicum of a slight upgrade at the punt returner position. So stay tuned for that article at milehighhuddle.com. It is coming. But meantime, we have another topic we want to get to here. Really interesting ESPN article by John Keim interviewing Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, and Matt LaFleur. LaFleur, of course, the new head coach in Green Bay. We're going to dive into what they had to say about your new head coach, Vic Fangio, on the other side of the break. We'll be right back.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, Zach. So this was a very illuminating article. For more reasons than one, I would suggest all listeners go read this ESPN article by John Keim. On milehighhuddle.com, you can see kind of the article that Carl Dummler wrote, riffing off of this and kind of reacting to what these coaches had to say. Follow the link there to the ESPN article. You can read the full article because not only they're going to talk about Fangio, which we'll address here in just a second, but these are all, coming off the Shanahan tree coaches, offensive young guys who basically Rich Scangarello is trying to emulate, right, as the new offensive coordinator. So a lot of interesting takeaways and insights from this three-headed interview, basically, from that John Keim did at ESPN. But here's what I want to get to. He was asked, each one of them, I should say, they were asked, who's their toughest opponent, coaching-wise, to go against. Each one of them, without fail, said Vic Fangio. And I want to go through each one and we'll react, Zach. So let me start with LaFleur. Again, the new head coach in Green Bay working with Aaron Rodgers. He said, quote, "There are so many guys and every system is different, but I look at Vic Fangio, just the fronts and the multiple looks you get from him. That's incredibly difficult. Shoot, Indianapolis last year, we knew exactly what they were going to do to us, and we didn't have a lot of success because they were so sound. They stuffed the run out of a two-safety defense and played extremely fast." So what he's trying to say there, close quote, what he's trying to say is that they played Indianapolis. They knew what was the Tennessee Titans, which is where he was last year. They knew what they were going to see from Indianapolis' defense. They played them straight up, but because they executed, it was still difficult to beat them. Whereas with Fangio, he just throws the different fronts, the multiple looks, and as LaFleur says there, Zach, it's incredibly difficult.
It is, and that's why I was mentioning the fact that, they may lack a defensive end in certain positions, but with Vic Fangio and the mad scientist and him being this guru, he's going to cook up all sorts of schemes and all different ways to move around these players and maximize production and do what's best for the Broncos defense. Already to see this praise, I see it in front of me, these quotes, and they get more and more, over the top and more, praiseworthy and positive. But the fact that it's opening up with the new head coach and he already compared him and held him to that standard, that says a lot about what the Broncos have in Fangio.
Let's jump over here to what Mr. Kyle Shanahan had to say. Quote, "My hardest has probably always been Vic Fangio. He does so many things with his personnel groupings that he puts you in a bind with protections. He ties a lot of stuff together. Playing against him, I feel he packages stuff very similar to how I would think. Bill Belichick is very similar. They do it in a different style. They don't just run their defenses. They figure out what you're doing, and then they think about how to stop what you're doing, and that's very similar to how I am. I don't just run my offense. I have no idea what I'm going to call until I know what defense I'm visualizing and trying to attack. It's fun." Close quote. Your thoughts on Shanny there?
I mean, how could you see that and not be excited about what you have in Vic Fangio? This is why, in hindsight, it was smart of the Broncos to pass on Shanahan's father and resist Ellis's overtures and not bring back Mike Shanahan, because it turned out the fact that you're going to get the next defensive head coach genius for the next 10 years, hopefully, your next own personal John Madden and Vic Fangio, a guy who's going to establish his brand in Denver and really prove all this praise correct. It's not just fluff. This is what Fangio has done year in and year out, no matter where he's gone. And he's been kind of under the radar. He's turned out head coaching opportunities. He's kept to himself. Everyone knows now he's a low-key, old-school guy. But now he's in the public eye, and everyone's starting to see and experience a Fangio defense, and it's just so exciting for what the Broncos have for the future.
All right, one more here from Mr. Sean McVeigh. Needs no introduction from us, but one thing I do want to say to set the stage for his remark here is McVay went head-to-head with Fangio last year when the Rams played the Bears, and it was the lowest scoring. Not only did the Rams lose, it was the lowest scoring output from a McVay-coached Rams team since he joined, of course. So Fangio smacked them down. They only scored 6 points. Bears scored 15, emerged victorious. Here's what McVay said. Quote, "For us, I think Fangio and the Bears did an outstanding job of a sound scheme with versatility mixed with great players. And clearly what New England did down the stretch was impressive. Those are the two defenses that gave us the most trouble. I thought the Saints were excellent as well." So he's throwing in a couple other ones there. Dennis Allen in New Orleans and, of course, Bill Belichick. But it was Fangio, in the regular season anyway, that flummoxed the Rams. And then, of course, Bill Belichick embarrassed him on the biggest stage.
And it's so funny because people at first criticized, or at least were surprised by, the fact that Elway went against the grain and didn't hire a Zach Taylor or didn't hire a young offensive mind. He went with an old defensive coach and defied common day NFL logic, and it's worked out for the Broncos, at least on paper and at least to this extent. Everyone wants the next Sean McVay, and you're seeing there a quote from Sean McVay praising the guy the Broncos just got. Like I said, it's just exciting that already established coaches who people hold in the highest regard are turning around and then first, just gushing about what the Broncos rookie coach is already doing, what he can do, what he has done, and what he brings to the table. It's just very exciting.
I cannot disagree, and I want to just really quick, we're still on the same topic of this trio of offensive coaches. I want to shift gears just really quickly onto the topics of coaching quarterbacks, because each one of these guys in their own way are considered quarterback gurus for the modern NFL. And they were asked, of course, by John Keim, with quarterbacks, what is your deal breaker, the trait you cannot tolerate? And there's 2 points he talks about here with quarterbacks that I want to address and kind of try to project or juxtapose that with what we know about Drew Lock. Here's what Shanahan said about the deal breaker, the trait he cannot tolerate in a quarterback. Quote, if a guy is scared to get hit, he has no chance to play in this league. You have to use your brain, and there's so much going on in the heat of battle. Your mind has to be clear when the ball is snapped to understand coverages and throw the ball in tight windows to get the ball to the right spots. Close quote. Now, here's what LaFleur said, the deal breaker with quarterbacks. Quote, I look for natural throwers, just smooth, fluid deliveries. The greatest throwers of all time do it in their own way. There's a natural throwing ability amongst most of the great players to ever play the position, the Bradys, the Rodgers. That's one of the things when I started evaluating college quarterbacks coming out, I look and see if they have a natural throwing motion. If they don't, I lose interest pretty quickly. And then McVeigh's deal breaker, quote, the biggest thing is consistent accuracy. I'm looking for accuracy, timing, and location, and give guys a chance to run after the catch and being able to change the arm angles. That's number one. Close quote. All right, so those 3 things being said, how many do you think Drew Lock checks each one of those boxes at this point, or do you think it's too early to say? Or how many of those boxes do you think he checks?
I mean, I was screaming in my head, all that sounds like Drew Lock, Chad. I mean, it would explain why the Broncos have gotten him killed behind these second and third team offensive lines. If they want, and if Fangio's taking his cues from coaches that want quarterbacks to get hit, it all sounds like what Drew Lock can offer. Natural arm talent, a tendency to overcome being rattled, and his mental processing is not there yet, but the Broncos obviously think he can be in that elite level franchise quarterback tier for the future if they just develop him correctly. But yeah, it all screams Drew Lock, and that's why he's the future of this franchise. And that's why we both implored Denver to get him as many reps as possible and let him put all those things on tape and build from that and not waste your time with other quarterbacks. It's another subject, but again, it's just encouraging that you have that potentially defensive genius, guru and Vic Fangio already on staff. You have your potential franchise quarterback already on staff. You have 2 of the biggest pieces possibly in place. That should excite Broncos fans more than anything.
Absolutely. All right, last thing I want to touch on that these 3 had to say is the most difficult thing to get rookie quarterbacks to learn is what? Shanahan says, quote, how to play in the pocket, especially for guys now. A lot of guys don't hold on to the ball long in college. You don't do as much play action, especially in the spread systems. And the defensive lines don't even rush, except at a few of these big schools because they're so tired and there are so many big plays. So for Shanahan, it's about playing in the pocket. McVeigh says, quote, the intricacies of what a defense could present, how it affects decision-making based on situations. The game has so many. A game usually has 65 to 75 snaps, and the amount of different things based on the situation and the defensive coordinator, it's a lot of information. So what he's saying there in terms of what the most difficult thing to get rookie quarterbacks to learn is just processing, right? Being able to process what you're seeing and play fast. And then LaFleur says, quote, you get in this league, and now you have to step in the huddle, and depending on the system, the play calls can get verbose. That challenge of trying to teach them the command that needs to happen within the huddle and being a master of cadence. A lot now use silent counts or claps when they want the football. We always talk about this, that the cadence for an offense is a weapon. It's an art, and it's an art you learn over time. How do you become a master of a cadence, close quote. So 3 interesting looks at what each coach thinks is the hardest thing for a rookie quarterback to grasp. And I think, Zach, it's pretty fair to say that each one of those 3 attributes are ones that Drew Lock is he's struggled to master, but I think he has shown throughout this summer before he got hurt that he's making progress with each one.
He has, and he's shown glimpses of why he was a second-round pick who the Broncos were ecstatic to get in that round. A guy who was a potential top 10 pick at one time, a potential face of this franchise for the next decade. That's what Drew Lock can be, and that's what we've been saying for months now. If they just handle him correctly, he's getting there. He's been improving every single week. Unfortunately, this injury just throws a wrench into all the plans with the short term and the long term. But, for a year down the road, Patrick Mahomes, I wouldn't say is a totally unrealistic projection for what Drew Lock can bring to the table, at least in charge of revitalizing the franchise and bringing back hope under center and putting fans in the seats. I think he can do that.
Amen, brother. Well, hey, you guys, that's going to do it for today's episode of the Huddle Up Podcast. The Building Broncos fellas will be back in the saddle with a Scout's Eye preview of some sort tomorrow, Wednesday. Now, I don't envy them, Zach, because how are you going to Scout's Eye preview a boring, lackluster, meaningless fifth preseason game? I mean, this fourth one was hard enough to watch, right?
Right.
Fifth one, my goodness. I mean, they might just end up doing some kind of a roster projection or predicting the 53 or something. And if they do, count yourselves lucky, because who needs to? I mean, you're not going to see any ones in that game. You're not going to be seeing Kyler Murray. The real Scout's Eye previews where they really start getting down to the nitty-gritty and helping to educate you, the listener, on the coming opponent each week. That's going to start, of course, next week. But stay tuned for that episode tomorrow. Meanwhile, I want to remind everybody, go over to iTunes, leave a creative review. I guess it's Apple Podcasts now. Give us a 5-star rating if you like what you're hearing, and enter, by doing so, into the drawing. We're going to give away some Mile High Huddle, some Huddle Up Pod swag on September 1st, randomly to someone who left a review on our Apple Podcast page in the month of August. So look at that. Make sure you're following the show on Twitter, at Huddle Up Pod. You can find my partner, Zack Kelberman, on Twitter, at Kelberman NFL, and myself at Chad and Jensen. Stay tuned. We'll see you on the other side of Hump Day. For Zack Kelberman, I'm Chad Jensen. We'll talk to you then.
You've been listening to the Huddle Up Podcast. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.